think we have to reframe that feelings suck. It's what makes us alive. It's what separates us from every other creature on the planet. We have this opportunity, and I have to think that that's for a reason. Whatever that evolution was, or God-given gift, whatever you believe in, but that ability for us to be sentient, I think we've all for some reason taken for granted, and we try to push all these feelings away, and it's like, oh, I'm just like at this complete peace. It's like, no, you can scream, you can cry. Like, people think that when you're like really healthy, like you never get mad or you never yell. Like, that's not it either. It's just not judging when it happens and then assessing why you're at the point that you're in.
Welcome to Tad Voices. I'm Nick.
And I'm Lawson, and we're friends and former teammates who are here to talk about mental health.
We are by no means experts in this field, nor is this a substitute for professional help, but we can promise open and vulnerable conversations that highlight the strength of some amazing people who have decided to share their story with us.
Talk, share, help. And thanks for listening.
Today, we welcome to Tad Voices Elissa Shay. Elissa is an actor, filmmaker, and mental health advocate as she started a series called Mental Health Mondays on her Instagram page. There, she passes along tools to combat mental health challenges and helps remove the stigma of mental health challenges like depression and anxiety. We are so excited to have you on and look forward to hearing more about yourself and your mental health initiatives. Thank you for being with us today, Elissa.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for coming on. We're excited to have you for sure. But how have the last few months been like? How was your summer?
Oddly, quarantine was really good for me. So it took a second to readjust. That being said, I'm not the most social butterfly. So being told you can't really go anywhere, I was like, okay. Once I got over the acceptance of that, it was really satisfying to get to know who I genuinely missed and who my identity was outside of busying myself with work 24 hours a day. And so that was actually really enlightening for me to navigate that and figure out what are the things that matter, and getting back to the root and the basis, and then anything outside that doesn't service that, is it something I want to welcome back into my life once we go back to this new normal, dare I say, or progress forward beyond this. So
I think that's fantastic. You see so many people sort of waste this time. So I'd like to say congratulations for being able to take advantage of it. Because I know that, at times it's been difficult for myself and for my family and my friends. And I think that's a great way to approach it. And, who knows how much longer this may last for. So anybody listening, I think that's a great, piece of advice to take moving forward until we're, again, sort of out of this a little bit, right?
Yeah, I think there's this acceptance that has to take place that this is happening. And so the more you fight it, the more resistance you're going to meet, because none of these things are within your own control. None of these things are things you could just change tomorrow if you say, even if you want to, even if you put everything you had, every dollar, every moment into making this different than it is what it is. And so I think coming to terms with that, as difficult as it is, actually allows a lot of freedom in what you can make of this or what you do next. And so I didn't just come to that on my own either. I do have a therapist life coach that I work with every week, and so she also helps guide me in that way. But
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic perspective to take on the situation for sure. But I think this will probably be a good time just for us to kind of open up the floor to you and really just kind of walk us through your personal journey and your experience within the mental health space.
sure. I sort of fell into it all by accident. I had a lot of front-loaded trauma. So from maybe 2 to 7 ish was the brunt of my most traumatic years, I would say. And then, not that children typically around that age are suicidal, but it was an understanding that like the world was a really hard place. And so it wasn't thoughts of like, oh, or suicidal ideologies in any means as far as like what I would do, but it was as rough and tough as I thought my life was. I knew that other people were suffering more. And that was actually what was really hard for me to wrap my brain around. It was like, in a way, like, you don't know you're a martyr at that age, you know? But it was like this idea of like, well, if I'm going through all of this and the rest of the world is fine, that would be one thing. But it's like, I'm going through all of this and so is everybody else. And then it became something I like really stuffed down because I had no tools. Growing up in an Asian house, I'm half Korean. Mind you, my mom is like she's from Korea, but came here when she was 10. Mind you, she's very open. So it was never like the conversation couldn't be had. It was just the perfectionist ideal that like you're fine. And unless you're bleeding out and dying, you're fine. And so I didn't know I didn't want to let them down. I think we'd forget the pressures that kids endure of like needing to be perfect in the eyes of their parents, in the same way like parents need to be perfect in the eyes of you. And so it was sort of like a long journey. It was a lot of codependent relationships. It was a lot of chaos. It was a lot of bad relationships. And then when I was 27, I got out of a 5-year relationship. I just felt like I had no idea who I was. I didn't know what I liked. I had like forgotten how to laugh. Like there were just all of these things that had compounded over time. And now I can look back and be like, okay, the onset of it was as a child. And then you revert sort of to that age and when you deal with your other traumas that come up as you go through your life. And so it became this realization of like, oh, I have a lot of work to do. Like I was really mad at the world, kept being like, well, if people were nicer, if everyone treated me better. It was this idea that it's the world's fault. And then in that, it became very hopeless. And so I really didn't start consistently seeing a therapist till last year. I got led to Al-Anon because I had collected quite a few addicts in my life, which was interesting. That was a little too intense for me personally. I just like couldn't get through a meeting without bawling and like being upset. And so I was like, I don't know that this helps. It felt so draining. But that being said, I did pick up nuggets there that led me, I think, to being open to where I am now. And then once I started healing and realizing that there were other people going through what you're going through, which I know is like the most common thing everybody says, you're not alone. Everybody's like, someone else is going through what you're going through. You're like, no, they're not. They're just not. Like, there's no way. And then once you sort of knock that door open and you see a room full of people and you're like, oh, they meant it. Like, this is what they meant. I got really frustrated that it took that long for me to get the resources and the help that I needed. And it really felt like because people were too scared to talk about it. Like people were so fearful that they wouldn't get the job or they'd lose their friends or this, that, and the other. And that really bothered me. And so for better or for worse, I couldn't not share my own experience. It actually started with a blog I used to write, which was just Free Thought Friday. And I would just like post these and then I just wasn't very consistent with it. And then the Mental Health Monday started. I used to just like randomly post and then I'd have people reaching out being like, this is so helpful. And then it started to click like, okay, so that I have something to offer. And even if it helps one person figure out how to manage their anxiety or to understand their part of their journey with depression, then it was worth it to say something. And so that's sort of how it came full circle for me. I like really had to go through a lot. And then luckily I'm not one in going through all that I went through. I will say like I am very type A and like very controlled. And so like in that, like it never spawned into like drugs and alcohol, thankfully, which I think is a lot of the anesthetizing that takes place when you're really suffering. I think I had just been surrounded by so many addicts that I was fearful that that's what would happen to me if I even like gave in a little bit to the idea that I could release the pain that way. And then also watching other people think they could, and then coming out on the other side of a binge and being like, oh, your life is blown up. And so I'm grateful that I had those examples, as much as it was difficult, because it altered the way that I handled it, I think, in a way that was probably better for me overall.
So you mentioned a couple things there that I think are very interesting, but I think to sort of break down, I guess, your journey a little bit, could you touch on, so you talked about, front loading, having some trauma from, 2 to 7 as a child, and then really for the first time, seeking any sort of, therapy or counseling around the age of 27. During, your, middle school, high school, early adulthood life, did you ever think about counseling? Did you know sort of, hey, this is difficult for me, but I'm dealing with it my own way? Or sort of take me through that a little bit?
Yeah. So what I had gone through as a kid actually led to people needing to get involved. And so there was court-ordered therapy when I was 7. And that, as much as I can see why it was required, probably really pushed me from going to therapy for a really long time. I did see a therapist when I was in college. My stepdad and my mom got divorced. And I had also just shouldered this burden that like my family would fall apart when I went to college, because I felt like I was the one holding everything together. And then I left and they were fine, and that was almost worse, because I was like, why did I go through all of that if y'all are fine? And so I did, I don't know, I don't want to like talk shit on psychiatrists, but when I was 19, I did see a psychiatrist, and then his immediate response was to put me on 2 prescriptions, and one was Adderall and the other was lorazepam, and like not even like wean me onto Adderall, like was like, bam, here's 20 milligrams. And like I also came to find I'm also very drug sensitive, so that for me would like keep me up for 3 days. And as a depressed person, when you can't sleep, there's almost nothing worse. Like when you're laying in bed and you're having racing thoughts and there's nothing you can do, and then you also can't sleep, you're like, what is this? So I had mixed feelings about their capabilities of even wondering how they could help me. The woman I'm working with now, she was a therapist. Now she's transitioned to life coach because she felt she needed more. You can only do so much as a therapist. You can listen and you can guide, but you can't like recommend things. And so in that, she felt that the life coaching was more rewarding, in the sense that like she actually saw people make changes and shifts. And that was really effective for me personally.
And this is kind of going back to your earlier response a little bit. And I think right off the bat, the one thing I want to say is that, I think it's really, it's not easy to kind of use your own experiences and try to, channel those to help others. So I just really want to say thank you, and I commend you for doing that, because it's not easy, right? A lot of the time it's even harder to talk about it when it's your own experiences. But I just kind of wanted to see, was there a specific time, maybe a specific event that you were like, okay, it's time that I start sharing. I want to help others. I want to do Mental Health Mondays. Like, was there a specific instance?
It might have come from a more self-serving place of wondering what other people had to say about it. Like if I was brave enough to say, brave enough, if I could lay my ego down enough to put it out there and say, hey, I'm going through this. Like, does anyone else feel this way or have a tool that works for them? And I just spend a lot of time consuming information, and sometimes just like even saying it out loud or like bouncing it out to like the ethers puts it in order in my brain a little bit more organized. Like it just sort of clicks into place, and then you're like, oh, that's what that meant, or like, oh, I read all these things and it added up to this understanding. And so I think part of it was just figure out like, Anxiety has become such a buzzword, in my opinion, that I was curious if like people felt the way that I felt. I had so much anxiety that I didn't know that I had because I just thought that's how everybody felt. I thought everybody knew what it felt like to be like sweating all the time or have your heart racing or like not be able to like words stuck in your mouth and your lips literally just won't open to let them out. Like I thought that that was just how everybody functioned. And then once I started opening up the dialogue, I started to realize like, oh, that's why so many people can just let things go because it literally doesn't affect them. And so it took me like a really long time to grasp that. I'm not really sure why. That was one of the things that like I don't know, I guess because my experience had been that for as long as I can remember, I just thought that's what it was to like be human. But I think really coming out on the other side of my relationship was the thing that blew it open for me because like I had to it was like the quintessential like whether or not he did it or I did it, I guess we don't know. But like separating from your friends, like just the isolation of it all. And so it became this like I had a year where I just did me and like really just tried to like get back to a place of homeostasis. And then when I started doing research and stuff, it really occurred to me like I'm pretty high functioning. So those that there has to be a more common ground for a conversation about this for people who potentially could just need one piece of information that could get them to that place of building your life back together. Because when you're so empty, it feels like the impossible feat to like even put one step in front, foot in front of the other to like move forward. But once you do it, like all of a sudden, like all the weight you're under actually just falls off. And I think that that's the part that's scary is like you think you're gonna have to drag this weight, and sometimes you do. Sometimes it shows up, but for the most part, it's like the thought of moving forward is actually much more difficult than just doing it. And so I think that way it was also part of my test for myself. Like, can I do this? Like, am I really ready and willing to move beyond sort of what I believe is holding me back?
I think that's a really good point that we haven't really touched on, you know, in our podcast yet. But it's kind of, it could be just that one, like you said, one little piece of information, one story that you connect with that kind of breaks that cycle and kind of can help propel you out of like a hamster wheel, essentially, right? When
Yeah.
you're kind of, so I think that's a really interesting point.
Yeah, and I'd like to go a little bit, I mean, from knowing you for, 15 minutes here and talking with you, my sense, and this could be completely wrong, is that you obviously care about, it seems like you care about others most likely before yourself, and getting to a place where you use the term, shoulder the burden earlier. And, I can relate to that as well, where, you feel like you need to take all of this on and you can't necessarily, focus on yourself to get yourself to a place of, functioning or, keeping yourself going, let alone, other people who are relying on you. Right. But I think what in 2020, my question for you is how does work, affect your mental state, and are you able to sort of release yourself from the 24/7, anybody could email you at any time or anything like that? I'd like to know how you deal with that, because I know that I struggle with that daily. I get an email and feel like I need to respond the next second, right? And I could be at dinner with my girlfriend and then she's like, what are you doing? Like, oh yeah, you're right, this probably isn't what I should be doing, right? So just sort of being, I know nothing about, filmmaking or acting or anything like that, but how has that affected your sort of, mental health, and being able to separate sort of, what's great for yourself, but also, being a great professional?
It has taken me a lot of trial and error. Um, but the one thing, like if I could impart it on any person, is manageable boundaries. If you don't respect your boundaries, nobody else will. And it took me a really long time to embody the fact that like the world will not end if I don't respond right now, or if I don't handle this right now. I talk with my therapist a lot about the true joy I get from my work, and try to make sure it's like it's healthy. I question it instead of just embracing that it makes me feel great. And if it were to be taken from me, I want to know I'd be okay. And so even last week I had like this amazing day, and I was so full of work, and like I just back-to-back meetings, but I was like so excited and like just like thriving. And my next session with my therapist, I was like, so I had a great day, but like I just want to make sure it's okay that I wrap so much of my own value in my work. And she makes me schedule fun in my calendar. Like quite literally, she makes me write it down. Like, and she's like, take a full day off. Like, even though people tell you you're not supposed to, like, just block it out. Like, you will be fine. You're gonna play catch up the next day. You're gonna knock it out. Like, you're so functioning that it's not that big of a deal. But like, if you do not schedule it in, it will find other things to place in there. And so it was learning to set boundaries with myself, and then getting over the fear of the responses of people who benefited from me not setting boundaries. That was the other part that gave me a lot of anxiety. Is like, oh my God, these people are gonna be really mad that all of a sudden they can't just like get everything they need out of me the second they need it. But I can say that once it started to happen, people actually adjust a lot faster than I thought they would. That's sort of roundabout answer to your question.
That makes a lot of sense. And I mean, Nick kind of touched on it, but especially in this day and age when we're all so interconnected, it can be really difficult to just kind of, take some time for yourself. So I think that's a kind of a good exercise, is just, actually going into your schedule and physically,
No, she made like absolutely. She literally is like, from this to this time, like just write free time, or like schedule something fun, or movies, or like and then the other thing, this documentary just came out like a couple days ago, but The Social Dilemma. It's on Netflix. If you
Yeah,
haven't watched it,
I've heard it. I was just recommended that I
it
watch it, but I haven't tuned into it yet.
I just watched it yesterday. It is such an important movie, because right now, and what it exposes, it's like all the top execs from like the top apps, and their whole purpose is to get you addicted. And then if they know you're online, usually during your lunch hour, like 12 to 1 or whatever you schedule, if you're not on, like they'll send you a notification to get you to pick up your phone. So that, because as long as you're scrolling, you're worth money. If you're not scrolling, you're not worth anything. And so, and then it's the slow overtime change of your own thought process is what they're after. And it's just interesting because they talk about suicide specifically in the documentary, and they say since the onset of like in like 2000, around 2000, the rates of suicide for girls like under 12, which used to be like pretty non-existent, has gone up 126%. And then for girls like 14 to 17, it's gone up 86%, something in those ranges, like something just astronomical, where you're like, okay, so there is this, it doesn't just feel bad, it is bad. And so I think in that, tying into the boundaries, like really limiting screen time, like I'm always like, oh, I'm not that bad, I don't spend that much time on my phone. And then I get like that weekly average, and I'm like, 6 hours, like what was I doing? Mind you, I think that counts like phone calls and like stuff like that too. And so I'm like, okay, so like half of it was work. Like but I think it's going to be on us as individuals to just really hold ourselves accountable to what is work, where do we want to spend our time. And I mean, it's our most valuable asset. It's the only thing you can never get back. And so when we think about that, like, is that really how we want to spend it? But yeah, getting over, it's really, for me, for work, it's getting over that like the world won't end and nobody's really going to be that mad.
Yeah, and I think that's the hardest thing, especially as a younger, you know, a younger person, looking to make an impact, right? Like you feel like you have to, be on the ball all the time. Somebody's out there watching, right? Like And, it's almost like understanding, like finding a boundary of like, you are important, but you're also not that important that somebody's like literally watching over you 24/7, and you taking a deep breath and understanding that like, you know, I'm driving, I shouldn't respond to this email, or I'm, having family time or whatever it is. Like, I don't need to be on my phone. And I think what you said too is like, time is your most valuable asset, right? Like, how many times do you go on your phone and then all of a sudden you pick your head up and it's like 45 minutes later and you're like, what was I even watching? I don't remember what I watched. So I think that's a great point. And, I think that leads, you know, for you, if somebody were to come up and talk to you, I'm struggling with this. I've, found myself, not necessarily in the same routine that I had, and I just can't get myself going. How would you talk to somebody about their mental health? How would you ask somebody about how they were feeling? Just sort of your best practices, having been in the space for a little while.
Um, it's interesting. I've had a few people reach out, and there's always this like, am I responsible for their well-being now that they're seeking help from me? Um, and that does scare me a little. I'm not a professional. I always try to remind people I'm just sharing my experience, which is the only thing I like can't argue with, is like my own existence of how I move through this world. But um most of the time I try to link them to resources from like professional websites, and just like, if you are in a place of wanting to hurt yourself, or if you are in a place where like things feel that destitute, like, who do you trust? You need to tell somebody like in your physical life so that they can help guide you. Yeah, it gets really tricky because it feels scary to say something, and then, I mean, not that technically I would even know if anything probably happened, but it takes a lot for someone to reach out, which I also really respect and try to hold dear. And so um sometimes we'll dialogue for a while. I mean, it just, it's hard because at the end of the day we're just like all trying to get our needs met for our little child wounds that we're trying to heal. And unfortunately, sometimes that's just attention seeking, needing time, physical time, which is not something I can split myself into 9 million people to help with that. So I do try to mostly field it towards educational tools, and just let them know that they're heard and that I do recognize, and that if they're willing to do the work, they can also find stability and peace.
The ultimate goal, at least in my eyes, is just to keep. I think the only way where we get to a point where people are more comfortable reaching out to others and explaining their struggles. I think the only way we get there is if we kind of continue to have just like this, like these open conversations where we're trying to break down a stigma, and it's not easy. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. I think there's definitely been a lot of positive work done, specifically probably in the last 5-10 years or so. But I think that's an important point. But,
What have your friends, how have they acted? Because obviously you've been very open about, experiencing with, different types of therapies. When you bring it up to somebody, I guess one, what is their reaction typically, and what would you want the reaction to be?
It's so funny when it's a bunch of people I don't know watching. I have no like adrenaline rush of like, what are they gonna think? And then I see like a few names and I'll like scroll through the list. I try not to look at it all, but like sometimes I'll see names of people and I'm like, oh, I wonder what they thought. But I figure if they're continuing to watch, it's because they're getting something out of it. Um, Trauma is universal. I mean, like, regardless, if even if you had a perfect life, when your parents pass away, that's like known to be one of the most traumatic experiences, and everyone will have that happen at some point. And so, um, I just hope that what people are hearing humanizes me in a way, you know what I mean? Is that like I'm not any different. we're made of the same stuff. And if I can help someone have one less day than I did, having to go through what I went through to get to where I am, that would be probably the end goal. Just like, I mean, marketing, right? It's just like you hear things enough times and then it starts to work on you. And so if I can say it out loud enough, perhaps maybe, uh, even if it just gets them to Google, start poking around at resources. I mean, that's the toughest part with mental health is like there isn't a one right way by any stretch of the imagination. So it's doing the work to put together something that works for you personally. I like a schedule, but at the same time, I like the flexibility of being able to move things around if I need to. Um, but some people need like regimented. I get up at this time, I do this every day, and like, and that's great for them, and it helps their brain function in a way that supports their lifestyle. And so, but that's all dependent on like paying enough attention to your own life to facilitate for you what you need, because nobody else can do it for you. Even if they wanted to, they can't read your mind and like feel your feelings in the moment to help.
That's a great answer, and I think we've gone. It's really been awesome speaking with you. We've gone a little bit over the time, but it's usually how Nick and I kind of like to end the podcast. Is we have a kind of a universal question that we like to ask everybody, and that is kind of now looking back on some of your experiences. What does mental health look like to you, or mental well-being?
I'm glad you called it that. I would really love to change the dialogue around mental health, like more of a mental well-being standpoint. For me, mental well-being is knowing that life is going to be really hard, no matter how wealthy, how not well, how difficult things become. There will be moments in your life that will be really trying. But when you have stored up tools and energy in around your mental well-being, it doesn't have to destroy you. And I think that that was always what it felt like. Like I was always on the brink of just like not existing, or like, or breaking down to a point where like maybe I wouldn't recover. And so for me, it's that's what I started to recognize. It wasn't so much like, wow, I feel amazing. It was the it was the absence of feeling really bad. And that to me is like the mental well-being. It's like, oh, I went 4 days without anxiety. I had no idea. And it's not like you immediately take it for granted. It's not like you sit there and you're like, oh my God, another day with no anxiety. This is amazing. It's like all of a sudden days have gone by and you're like, wait a second, I didn't have a moment where I was like derailed. This is great. And that to me is more the example of like a mental well-being. It's the state of like uh, progress. You're moving through it without realizing it. And so it frees up that much more energy and time into your life that you end up spending in better ways.
I like that answer a lot. And I think, the progress part for me hits home, and just the self-awareness, right? Of like understanding your body and your mind and your daily routine, and understanding that speed bumps are going to happen, and they stink, right? Like nobody's telling you that they're not bad. Like you could have a pebble in your shoe, and that pebble is going to affect one person, more so than another person. And that's totally okay. And just understanding that, I need to take a deep breath here and go back to, exercises or thoughts of, coping mechanisms that help get me through. Right. And I, I like that, understanding that it's not all butterflies all the time. And yeah, and just understanding that. So thank you for that. I think that puts it into perspective really well. Of not it's not going to just be easy, and things are
And
going to
I
come
think
up, and you
we
need to
have,
take advantage.
totally. And I think we have to reframe that feelings suck. It's what makes us alive. It's what separates us from every other like creature on the planet. We have this opportunity, and I have to think that that's for a reason. Whatever that evolution was, or God-given gift, whatever you believe in, but that ability for us to be sentient, I think we've all for some reason taken for granted, and we try to push all these feelings away, and it's like, oh, I'm just like at this complete peace. It's like, no, you can scream, you can cry. Like, people think that when you're like really healthy, like you never get mad or you never yell. Like that's not it either. It's just not judging when it happens and then assessing why you're at the point that you're in emotionally. And I think that that is also something that I would love to see people start to embrace more.
You definitely have to you have to allow yourself to be able to, whether it's good, bad, just to feel, right? And to be
Mhm.
kind of present in that moment for sure, and not burying it, because at the end of the day, if we're kind of burying our feelings and our thoughts, um that's not the appropriate way to deal with it, right? They're going to resurface themselves. But no, I just want to say, thanks so much for coming on our podcast, but more so, I want to say thank you for sharing your story and being open, and also for your thoughtful answers as well. I know, probably I'll speak for Nick, but we've definitely really enjoyed chatting with you.
Thank you so much. I feel honored that you reached out.